Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. All eyes on President Trump today as he visits El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, in the wake of the two mass shootings. Plus, a shift in the conversation. We're seeing how the 2020 candidates are responding to all of this. And out of darkness, there's always light. So we're showing how the El Paso community is standing strong. But first, here are your headlines.
On Wall Street, stocks fell sharply at the open, the Dow plunging more than 500 points before recovering a bit.
I think the market reaction is to be expected. I might have expected even more. At some point, as I just said, we have to take on China.
The woman who was a teenage sex trafficking victim when she was convicted of killing a man was released from prison. She was 16 years old at the time. This is a case that garnered a lot of celebrity attention. Centoya Brown was released from prison overnight after spending more than a decade behind bars. She was granted clemency after Kim Kardashian and Rihanna helped to fight back against her life sentence. Her attorneys say she was a victim of sex trafficking who feared for her life when she shot and killed a man in 2004.
North Korea says its latest launch of ballistic missiles was a warning to the U.S. and South Korea over their ongoing joint military exercises. It was their fourth missile launch in less than 2 weeks.
The fiber bowls used at Chipotle and Sweetgreen. A new report from the New Food Economy claims the bowls are exposed to chemicals that are linked to cancer. The study says all of the bowls tested contained PFAs, also known as forever chemicals. The chemical compounds help the bowls hold hot, wet, and greasy food, but the EPA says those same compounds do not break down in the human body. 40,000 bottles of wine spilled across an Illinois freeway. Sorry, got a little emotional. It happened yesterday morning when two tractor trailers crashed. Nobody seriously hurt. Wine drinkers were emotionally hurt, but it probably impacted lots of people's plans. Yeah. Emojis got supersized at one home in California, and the neighbors not so happy. The emojis went up on Catherine Kidd's home in Manhattan Beach. How'd you like to look across to your neighbor and see that? Oh, yeah. She says it's not retaliation, but she is not that happy with her neighbors. Kidd was using her home for short-term rentals until neighbors reported her, and she was fined $4,000.
A president visiting a city after a tragedy normally receives a warm welcome, a sign of solidarity in the midst of all of this pain. But mixed feelings today in both El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio, with all eyes on President Trump as he visits these two cities. He's actually landed in Dayton, Ohio now. You know, two cities still grappling in the aftermath of the mass shootings that have left 31 people dead. So the president spoke about his rhetoric as he left the White House. So let's take a listen to that.
No, I don't think my rhetoric has at all. I think my rhetoric is a very, it brings people together. Our country is doing incredibly well.
All right, so the biggest question here is, can President Trump help in the healing when he has created some of the division? So I want to bring in Jordan Phelps at the White House to discuss this. Jordan, you know, the president has landed in Dayton already. What has the conversation been about his visit?
Well, Kimberly, the White House insists that the president wants to go there to unify, to grieve, and share in the sorrow and the anger of these communities. But Kimberly, we've seen all this criticism from the president's critics, but it's not just politicians who've been criticizing the president. As he likes to say, he's also getting a lot of criticism from members of this community. And we know that the president is expected to be received by protests in both of these communities. So that's going to be something tricky for this White House to navigate on the ground today.
Right, and then specifically in El Paso, you know, many people feel like the president's own rhetoric created the climate for the shooting that took place there on the Hispanic community.
Absolutely. The president not taking any personal responsibility for that, as you heard him there. But Kimberly, the president might get confronted by someone on the ground today. We'll see if that happens. We already saw the president blasting his critics, blasting Beto O'Rourke, an El Paso native, ahead of his visit to El Paso today.
So, Jordan, was there any concern from the White House about the President Trump's visits?
The concern from the White House has just been how to navigate the tricky politics that go along with this, since, as we've noted, many don't want him to be there. So it has been difficult for the White House to plan this trip. And as they have been doing the advance work, making sure that the president doesn't come face to face too often with these protests, we'll see whether or not they were able to pull that off, Kimberly.
And Jordan, you mentioned the tweet about Beto O'Rourke. What was the reason? Why would the president tweet and mock Beto before going to El Paso, talking about his Hispanic nickname?
Yeah, there's the tweet there. The president saying Beto is a phony name to indicate Hispanic heritage. And he goes on to say that O'Rourke should be quiet. What the president is probably responding to there is O'Rourke's fierce criticism of the president in recent days. He has said that the president is to blame for these shootings, and he has even gone so far as to call the president a white nationalist. So the president must have seen those criticisms from O'Rourke, and he is firing back. O'Rourke fired back at the president with his own tweet saying that members of his communities were killed because of his racist rhetoric, and he will not be quiet.
Yeah, very tense times. That's Jordan Phelps right there at the White House. Thank you so much. And guys, we're going to move to Dayton, Ohio, where we're seeing lines of protesters this morning, and also the Trump blimp flying in the city, where the investigation continues into the gunman that took 9 lives. So I want to go to Eva Pilgrim, who's on the ground in Dayton, Ohio, with the latest. Eva?
We knew the gunman of this mass shooting here in Dayton came here to the Oregon district with his sister earlier in the night, and at some point the two got separated. Now, for the first time, we are seeing those moments before the gunman opened fire on this bar.
This morning, police are investigating this surveillance video from inside a Dayton, Ohio bar obtained exclusively by CNN. In the video, CNN says you see 24-year-old Connor Betts, who allegedly killed 9 and injured dozens more, the moment he enters a bar with his sister and a friend, more than 2 hours before the massacre. Wearing shorts and a t-shirt, he's seen here stopping by the entrance and speaking to the bouncer at the door before exiting, reportedly just before 1 a.m. Minutes later, returning wearing a mask and wielding an assault rifle, firing into the bar across the street. Among those he killed, the sister he was reportedly with just moments earlier. Police in the alleged shooter's hometown of Bellbrook, Ohio, reading a statement on behalf of his family.
Betts' family is shocked and devastated by the events of Sunday morning in the Oregon district. They offer their most heartfelt prayers and condolences to all the victims, their families, and friends.
Now, the FBI is saying this gunman had a fascination with mass shootings. His ex-girlfriend saying that he actually showed her video of a mass shooting on their very first date.
All right, that was Eva Pilgrim right there in Dayton, Ohio. And the president's second stop later today is in El Paso, Texas. Obviously, emotions tense as this was a direct hate-fueled attack on the Mexican and Mexican-American community. And last night, we heard from Beto O'Rourke on the president's visit. So take a listen right now.
People in El Paso, by and large, do not want to see him here, understand that he is part of the problem, part of how we got to this point. We know now that he is coming, and I expect El Paso to do nothing short of ensuring that his visit is a safe one, that we are respectful towards him, but that we never forget his role in what happened on Saturday.
All right, so I want to bring in Megan Tavrezian right there in El Paso. Megan, how are the people feeling today? What have you heard?
Yeah, Kimberly, you know, it's really difficult to express the amount of grief this community's gone through the last couple days. Behind me is a memorial, and it's been growing daily. It's right by the Walmart where 22 people were shot and killed. And there have been people that are coming to pay their respects at this memorial day and night. There are 22 crosses there, and family members are here at all hours of the day, carefully tending to this memorial. It's very heartbreaking to see the grief that's here in El Paso. And I think a lot of people here are still in shock and struggling to comprehend what happened here just several days ago.
Absolutely, for sure. Can you give us the latest in the investigation so far?
Yeah, so right now the suspect, 21-year-old Patrick Crusius, he faces capital murder charges. But now the FBI is investigating whether they can bring federal hate and federal firearm charges against him, which could lead to the possible death penalty. Authorities say that he's showing no signs of remorse at this time. And if you remember, he did come here with this. El Paso is only 5 miles from the border, and according to authorities, he came here specifically to target as many Mexicans as he could. He first walked into the Walmart, scoped out the scene when he saw there were thousands of people inside that Walmart, most of them going back to school shopping. He came back later with a gun.
All right, Megan Tabrizian right there in El Paso. Thank you for the updates. Yeah, pretty traumatizing to see the footage replay over and over, but no one can describe the intricate details and feelings and cities of a community better than someone who grew up there, who lives and works there, like Carlos Sanchez, which is our next guest. He's a senior editor for Texas Monthly and penned some words about the El Paso community in the wake of this attack. Carlos, thanks for being with us. You wrote an article, it was called "What the Shooter and Trump Don't Understand About My Hometown of El Paso," and you called El Paso the new Ellis Island. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that there is a new trend in migration patterns, and the migration is coming from the south through Latin America, and El Paso has cordially treated these migrants with open arms. Many of them may not agree with the politics of immigration, but most of them agree that we need to treat one another with some decency. And I think that is what you're seeing in El Paso, and that is what may have been a motivator in this gunman's attack.
Yeah, one thing that's also interesting that you said no one is more responsible for spreading fear of migrants than President Trump. And you talked about the importance of the words that are used, because the gunman used the word invasion, and we know that President Trump has used the word invasion several times in recent Facebook ads for his re-election campaign. What do you think about that word?
Well, I think there's an irony here. I would guess that most of the victims in this horrible tragedy don't understand the political maelstrom that is about to beset El Paso with President Trump's visit. I would also further venture to guess that none of us understand the motivation behind mass shootings. But I would say a vast majority of El Pasoans understand prejudice. And what they're seeing in this manifesto that has been attached to the shooter is an outright prejudice that generations of El Pasoans have only heard about, but never really truly witnessed. And the manifestation of that, 22 dead, another 24 wounded, is a real harsh reality that all of us are trying to process.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that, because there is a real fear that the Latino communities are living with right now in terms of this word invasion, someone driving 650 miles to attack the community, and also everything that's going on with immigration. So can you just help us understand what the communities are facing?
Well, I think El Pasoans and Hispanics overall are very sensitive to the rhetoric surrounding the debate of immigration. President Trump has made immigration a top political priority, and I really can't fault him for that. It was something that dogged President Obama ahead of him. But the problem is, one of the easiest ways to win a debate in immigration is to dehumanize the immigrants. And that is what El Pasoans are particularly sensitive to, that notion of dehumanization.
Yeah, and Carlos, before we go, there's no doubt that El Paso, the city, has changed forever. But in your article, you did offer a little bit of hope at the end of it.
El Pasoans, I said, are an honest people, they're a candid people, they're a humble people, but they're a people who are very proud of their history and proud of their city, and they will stand up for themselves, and I think you will see that today with President Trump's visit.
All right, Carlos Sanchez, senior editor at Texas Monthly, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes. El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio are one of several mass shootings that have taken place in this country, the latest in a spate of domestic terrorism. Again, domestic terrorism, increasingly by white supremacists, is now as big a threat as terrorism abroad. So Pierre Thomas is in our D.C. bureau with the latest from the FBI. Pierre?
Kimberly, good morning. As the FBI seeks a motive in that Garlic Festival attack, they're trying to determine if the killer was pursuing some sort of sinister ideology. That mass attack now being investigated as a possible act of domestic terror. Authorities revealing the suspect allegedly planned to target churches, religious groups, governments, and political parties. U.S. law enforcement officials now facing two urgent threats, not only domestic terror, but a new era of mass killers inspired by previous massacres. Kimberly?
All right, thank you, Pierre. And I want to continue this conversation with Aaron Tatarskiy. It's interesting times we're living in now because people are now naming this. You know, they say you can't address a problem until you name it for what it is. We're saying domestic terrorism caused by white supremacists in most instances.
And especially in El Paso and Gilroy, California. So that's, what, two in less than a week's time. And it speaks to the frequency of these kinds of domestic terrorism cases in the country. There are now more than 850 open domestic terror cases that the FBI has been dealing with, and yet it's treated differently under the law than, say, international terrorism involving ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And they may have similar roots and causes, with disaffected, violent-prone young men who are spending an awful lot of time online, finding some kind of justification for their anger and a reason to act out. And that's part of the reason why of late we've seen a push to maybe treat domestic terrorism the same way we treat international terrorism, to give the FBI a little more leeway.
Before we go into something different, I just want to ask you, like, how do you treat domestic terrorism? It's such a big, difficult issue.
Yes, and there's First Amendment concerns. Right now, if the FBI hears somebody talking about something, or there's rhetoric, alarming though it may be, that's not enough for the FBI to open a case. They know there are First Amendment concerns, and so it may take a piece of legislation to open up some avenues. But that's a slippery slope too, and so it's something for the country to talk about.
So I want to talk to you about this because with all of this happening in our country, people are definitely on edge, not just the people in the communities where it happened. And there was an incident in New York City last night.
Right in Times Square, the crossroads of the world, theaters coming in, letting out, and there are motorcycles, a group of motorcyclists that rev their engines, causing a backfire. And instantly, people in Times Square take that for gunshots. And you can see on your screen how people react, and almost instantly people running for cover and stampeding to get out of the way. And you can see the tables and chairs there in Times Square at 42nd Street and 7th Avenue toppling over. And the fire department says that they treated 9 different people. They transported several of them to the hospital, thankfully for minor injuries. But it speaks to how jittery people are when they hear a noise now. The instant thought is not, oh, that's a motorcycle backfiring. Right. It's something else.
That it may be a gun. That is terrifying to see. I mean, that's very close to where we are now, and just the idea of walking through the city and then people just erupt into panic.
The good news is police knew right away what it was. They were able to get out on social media that this was just a motorcycle. I was in Times Square last night, actually, and I saw the aftermath of all the counterterrorism officers who are right there anyway, because that's something else. The posture of police is to be closer to where crowds gather, so that if something does happen, like in the entertainment district in Dayton, they can respond within seconds, though sometimes seconds is all it takes.
It's too late, yes. Well, this is an ongoing situation, unfortunately, but Aaron Tatarskiy, appreciate all of the information. So now we are going to move on. You know, it's very difficult and perhaps impossible to discuss the regularity of the mass shootings without discussing gun legislation. But despite all of the people killed, Congress so far has been unable to get anything done, primarily because the Senate is in recess and is not coming back at this time. So I want to bring in Mary Alice Parks and Rick Klein in our D.C. bureau. Mary Alice, let's first discuss how these two horrific tragedies are really changing the conversation. So I want to listen to some sound first from Cory Booker.
Contradictions that have shadowed this country since its founding remain a part of our body politic. It was sowed by those who spoke the same words the El Paso murderer did, warning of an invasion. It was sowed by those who spoke of an infestation of disgusting cities, rats, and rodents, talking about majority-minority communities. It was sowed by those who've drawn an equivalence between neo-Nazis and those who protest them. It was sowed from the highest office in our land, where we see in tweets and rhetoric hateful words.
Yeah, so Mary Alice, it's interesting because gun violence wasn't even mentioned in the first debate in Detroit, and now everyone is talking about it.
Look, this has been an incredibly unifying moment for Democrats. In that debate, we saw them go head-to-head over health care policy, and that feels like eons ago. Now they're remembering that universally they agree in things like universal background checks and ending high-capacity magazines, red flag laws. We're seeing almost all the 2020 candidates again call for an assault weapons ban. So in terms of both policy but also politics, this is really a moment where the party is coming together. All of them picking up a new criticism of President Trump, really laying these acts of violence at his feet. You hear there Senator Cory Booker speaking in Charleston at the site of another white supremacist act, saying that he really believes that the president's actions and the president's racist rhetoric is partly to blame for the uptick in white supremacy.
And Rick, you heard Mary Alice mention the red flag law. What is that legislation that may go through Congress?
Well, a red flag law would allow someone who has concerns about an individual's mental stability and whether they might be planning some kind of violent act to petition a judge to get a gun taken away or take away that person's right to have a gun. These have generally been done at the state level, but there's talk now for Congress to step in to try to incentivize states. There's 18 or 19 states that have these laws already. A bunch of more are considering them. So the idea would be the federal government would step in and give the states more of a reason to allow someone to go in there. And if they have a concern about a particular individual, they think they might commit a violent act, have a judge rule that even though they're not convicted of any crime, that they should not have a firearm.
Yeah, Kimberly, I would just say that gun safety advocates say that in about 50% of cases involving a mass shooter, there were some red flags. Now, 50% means that in 50% of cases there weren't, but they make the argument that anything done to help lessen gun violence is worth trying.
And Rick, so that was the red flag law, but there were also two other bills that the House already passed that haven't made it to the Senate floor. Do you think that Senate will come back from their recess to deal with these and get to work as Pelosi and Schumer were asking them to do?
Yeah, Kimberly, there's no sign of that. They're gone for the summer. Mitch McConnell has told his committee chairs to look into bipartisan solutions that they can start to work on this, but they're taking their leads mainly from the president. And right now, there's no sign of movement on either of these pieces of legislation. And as you mentioned, there are two big ones. One would require background checks for private sales. This would close the so-called gun show loophole, where if an individual wants to sell a gun to someone else, either online or in person at a gun show or a Craigslist, something like that, they don't have to go through a background check. That would close that. The other would close the so-called Charleston loophole, which right now the law requires that the FBI get a ruling on a background check within 3 days. And if it goes longer than that, then the person can buy the gun. The bill that passed the House would extend that to 10 days to take care of a situation like we saw in Charleston, where that individual actually was flagged by the background check system, but there was miscommunication, and therefore they went longer than 3 days, and he was able to buy the gun anyway.
And 90% of background checks are done almost instantaneously. With under 2 minutes, the FBI is able to make a determination. So we're really only talking about 10% of background checks where the FBI is asking for more time. But more than 20% of gun sales in this country are done without any background check at all.
Yeah, and let's just talk about some of the candidates' reactions again and some of the things that they've been saying. I want to talk specifically about the tweet from Joaquin Castro, who's the brother and campaign manager for candidate Julian Castro. Can you tell us about the controversy with these tweets that happened recently?
Sure. A sign of frustration, I think, on behalf of Congressman Castro. He called out on Twitter some individuals who've given money to the Trump campaign, called them out, put down their names, put their employers, and said you are funding hatred if you continue to give money to President Trump. Now, Congressman Castro points out rightly that this is publicly available information. You could Google it. You could look on FEC documents. It's all out there. But the idea of a congressman calling out some of his own constituents for political donations, you've got Republicans saying that this is an attempt at doxing them and getting them to be harassed, maybe even inciting violence against them. And I think it's an acknowledgement of how tensions have risen right now, that there's such concern about this tactic.
And Mary Alice, before we go, so controversy with Castro and then a little bit of back and forth with Beto O'Rourke on Twitter as well.
Yeah, just hours after President Trump said that this was a moment where destructive politics should be put aside, he took to Twitter and basically mocked the former congressman from El Paso, who's obviously running to be president and running for the Democratic nomination. Beto said that he will not be quiet. The two of them have been sparring online. And look, by and large, Democrats are saying that they think the president is incapable of being the consoler in chief, and they say that's an important role for any president to play.
All right, Mary Alice Parks and Rick Klein in our D.C. Bureau, thank you both for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And guys, we move on. These two tragedies and the other ones that we didn't name are painful and gut-wrenching, but somehow out of all of the darkness, hope always springs eternal. And in El Paso, it's coming from a little 11-year-old boy named Ruben Martinez, who drove by the Walmart on the day of the shooting and saw the first responders and asked his mother what was going on. She explained it to him. He had anxiety about it, but he also wanted to help. And he had a number of ideas, including one that completely went viral. And you see it here. It says hashtag El Paso Challenge. So what's the challenge? It's 22 good deeds, 22 random acts of kindness for the 22 people killed. Originally, it was 20, but when the death toll raised, he changed the number to 22. So Ruben said seeing the kindness is helping him move forward, and said the most important thing is for people to be kind all day, every day, all night, every night. So that's very beautiful. And again, we send all of our love to these communities. This is a challenging time, so we want everyone to continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you later.